One of the questions I get regularly on this channel is, what is the best Leatherman multi-tool? And frankly, I've resisted answering this question because I didn't have a great answer. Until now, I think there is a couple of things worth noting in the tool that's in this box, including a stealth change that they told no one about, a major update that makes, in my opinion, this tool the single best purchase you could make from Leatherman tools in 2024. Let's go ahead and take a look. So the tool I am talking about is, of course, the Leatherman Bond. Now, this is basically an homage to the original pocket survival tool that was released in 1983. It has essentially the same tool set, but improvements in almost every possible way. So we're going to break this video into two parts. First, showing how they've made huge improvements over the original, and then in the second half, we're going to compare it to the other parts of Leatherman's lineup and show you why this tool is such a good value. So with that, let's get started. Now, if you've watched any reviews of the Leatherman Bond, you may have noticed something that is different about this tool right here. So I'm going to bring in an older Leatherman Bond so you can see what they've actually improved, even though they have told pretty much no one. And that is in the blade. Now, the problem with the original design is, as you can see, there is a gap between the tang and the spring, and this allowed just the tip of the blade to expose itself without engaging at all. Now, the original design had very little to no retention in the first place, and as many people commented, no one really complained about it, but it was something that could have been reiterated on and improved on, and they have done so. And that is what we're going to briefly talk about. So this blade is exactly the same as what you will get in the Leatherman rebar, but the one in the new design, well, it's significantly improved. Not only does it have a longer cutting edge, it actually has a proper sharpening choil, which I have to say is a really nice addition. It engages with the tang right away at the very beginning, so it can't deploy at all. And it's just done really, really well. I cannot say enough. This is a really big improvement and is certainly worth mentioning. So at this point, I'm not going to talk about this one. We're going to finish up our comparisons with the original PST. The weight of the tool is a really good place to start when we're talking about a comparison. The original PST was 5 ounces, whereas the Leatherman Bond is 6 ounces. Do we get anything, though, for that extra ounce? Yeah, we absolutely do in this case, quite a bit, in fact. So it starts with the size of the plier head. So it's a significantly more robust plier than the original PST had. It has an additional spring that makes it much more consistent on retention closed and open without any movement that is going to disengage it. So it's quite a bit better in that regard. And for that reason, yes, there is definitely a huge improvement over the original. Now, in addition to that, we have the frame, which has changed drastically. Now, on the original design, it wasn't particularly ergonomic, but what's funny about this is it might have prevented some of the pliers from getting broken because people didn't want to squeeze much harder onto it. So maybe an unintended consequence, but the new tool with the stronger plier head also has better ergonomics. They actually rounded and folded the steel, which allows it to be quite a bit more comfortable in hand. And for that reason, it's definitely a tool that is going to be more comfortable to use. You can certainly use it a little bit harder than you would the original. That's a great start. Now, the other thing with the frame is the change in the lock tang. So check this out. You really start to hear how sharply that locks in versus something like what's on the original. And actually, this is one of the biggest changes. I mean, this is actually a pretty weak detent by comparison. That's a really nice thing. If you're not going to have locks, it's nice to have a very strong kind of set detent when it comes to opening the tools completely, especially if you're using any of the drivers, and you absolutely can notice the difference. Now, speaking of the rest of the tool set, we have the can opener, which compared to the past generations was quite a bit better because now we have a wire stripping notch, and being thinner, it's actually going to be better for opening cans in the first place. And then, wow, man, that is a strong lock. And then we have a full 3-dimensional Phillips. Now let me take out the Phillips on the PST so you can really see the difference here. It's a lot harder to access on the original. Like I said, not a super fair comparison, right? Almost 40 years difference. But definitely I want to show how they have improved over the past designs. So we have a significantly thicker 3-dimensional Phillips, which is taking up the majority of the space and probably some weight as well. And this is going to allow us to use the rebar bit system. This will work with Leatherman bits, standard 1/4 inch, and the Weha double-sided bits. In my opinion, this combination is actually better than having the bit driver installed. And there's a couple reasons for that. When you have recessed screws, even if you have the bit extender, the width around that collar is going to prevent you from getting into the hole. But having a long Phillips can actually be very useful. I've been unable to unscrew things because I used a tool with a standard Leatherman bit system versus something like this. And that's very frustrating. I still think that at this point, with all my experience, I would rather have this combination than have the bit holder itself. I really, really like this design, and being able to use this adapter, well, that's really, really good option. Now, when it comes to the flatheads, there are only 2 in the Leatherman Bond. So this is a big difference with the original PST, and I'm not so upset about it because the small flathead that was present in the Leatherman PST, this thing broke a lot. In fact, if you go to eBay right now, most of the used tools are going to have this all kind of messed up. That's what used to happen with that small flathead, and used to be used for everything but unscrewing small flathead screws. By today's standards, they're also a lot less common. More Phillips are present, so it's not as necessary. This also has a pair of flatheads that are very, very similar to the ones here, large and medium. And then the reamer awl. This is both a reamer and an awl, which is the hole right there for sewing. The original design does not have this. The additional detent really makes a difference with tools where you might be pressing down into them. And so I really feel like this is quite a bit safer and more secure than the original design. Okay, I think that's pretty much the whole tool set. And here's my favorite part of comparing the two. When the PST was first released, the earliest that I can find any information on, 1984, this tool was in Cabela's catalog for $40, right? The Leatherman Bond today, which by the way did go up $10, is $60. By today's money, this would be the equivalent of about 112 USD if you were going to transfer by inflation. So they have actually presented a very inexpensive tool here that on almost every front is basically an improvement over the PST with basically nothing that I can find with a flaw. And so for that reason, how could I not recommend this tool as something that will give you a positive experience? And for me, that is the most important thing. It's not necessarily that you should have as many tools as possible, because as you can see, it's missing some key things that some people might want. But what it does have, I know, is really, really good. Now, I just remembered I forgot one thing, and that is the file. Let's just say that the file on the Bond is significantly more aggressive than the one you will find on the original PST. This rebar file is one of the best that they have ever made, and I have to say is phenomenal. There's not much more to say. Compared to the original, and this one is in very good condition, well, it's significantly more aggressive. This flat single cut file may as well not exist. The cross cut's fine, but on the other 2 edges, absolutely a massive difference. So to conclude this, I just want to illustrate that they didn't just completely copy the PST, they also wanted to make some improvements. The last thing being a location to have the pocket clip, which you can get separately. Although I don't know if that's necessary because it does have a lanyard ring built into it, which is right here. You can see that right there. And yeah, that's kind of where I sit on the comparison. Where it really becomes funny is when you're comparing it to the rest of Leatherman's lineup. Now I can already hear it. Someone out there is saying, well, I won't buy a tool without a scissor. I use a scissor so much. Let me make a recommendation. Have you ever tried the scissor on the Leatherman Wave or the Leatherman Curl or a similar size? You might find that the scissors actually aren't that great, and they're pretty hard to get to as well. They're significantly worse than the ones on the 58mm Victorinox. These are far more precise. They tend to last longer. The cutting geometry is really, really good. There's little flex. And they come with a bunch of other added benefits. I mean, you can buy a small Alox Classic used like this for like $3 or $4 on eBay if you want. But I recommend probably going with something like the Jet Setter if you're going to buy it new, because in addition to the scissor, you're going to get this small Phillips, this number 0 Phillips, to complement your number 1, number 2 that's in the multi-tool itself. Now this tool will fly with you pretty much anywhere. And if you tend to check a bag, this is also going to be legal practically everywhere because it has a non-locking blade, it's a two-handed blade, and it's less than 3 inches in length. It's going to be legal in the UK, in Germany, in Italy, and many, many other places. Yet another reason why, even if you had a really expensive tool, if you had a Leatherman Wave, you still can't bring it everywhere you go. And that is why you probably still need a Leatherman Bond if you're going to carry a multi-tool with you everywhere you go. Just kind of the last word on the Bond, if you're missing the scissor, get a Jet Setter or get a Swiss card. It'll pretty much have you covered on the scissor aspect and probably a few other things as well. So I'm not going to compare this tool to everything in their lineup, but we're going to talk about these 3 and we're also going to compare it to a few others just in context. We have a $60 tool, a $90 tool, $120, and $230, nearly 4 times as much as the Leatherman Bond. This is a really nice spread because it shows how you're jumping up in price, and you can sort of make a proper decision on whether it's worth it or not. Now in the first jump to the Curl, this is where you're absolutely getting $30 in value in my opinion. You get a one-handed blade, you get a diamond file, you get an included pocket clip, you get a scissor, and it's just awesome. It's an awesome tool. It's probably my second highest recommendation, and it even has the bit kit as well, and even though it doesn't have a lock, my goodness, it engages really, really, really strongly, just like with the Leatherman Bond. So I can't, this is my second highest recommendation, but we're specifically talking about the Bond, which has basically no competition. Even within the lineup, it just doesn't. And speaking of some of the other similarly priced tools from Leatherman, the Wingman and the Sidekick, both are $10 more, much lower quality, and they used to be 40. I just want to point that out, that those tools used to be 40 and they weren't great at 40. They are particularly bad now. The scissors never cut very well. The partially serrated blade is really crappy on the Wingman, and the access to the tools, it's frustrating to say the least. I would never get the Wingman over something like the Leatherman Curl. Now the Sidekick has some tool set changes that might make it worth it, but generally speaking, I like this tool set. The way they have the tooling for this more upscale multi-tool, it's just such a difference over the cheap stamped tools that you get with the Bolster, the Rev, the Sidekick, and the Wingman. So I just cannot see a reason why I would ever pick one of those over these. Yes, I have to unfold it, get access to the blade, but it's just the quality difference is dramatic. And it is certainly worth jumping up a little bit if I wanted something that still had a one-handed blade and yeah, gave me a higher quality control. Now, the last thing I want to talk about with comparisons as we jump up, we start getting to the point where we have the replaceable cutters, and right now with the way they have these cutters set up with these extra gaps, which is really silly. I don't know how many times I have to say it. I actually think that these pliers, where they don't have the replaceable cutters, have a lot more allure to them They just work consistently. They have a very good setup for both hardwire and softwire without any issues. And the other thing is, if you compare it to something like the Leatherman Wave, this, when twisted, if you push too hard, you can snap the plier head just a little bit easier than you would with this. All that removal of metal right in here is actually going to create an additional weak point. So these technically are stronger pliers, believe it or not. Even though they won't have the longevity in the cutters that these will, if you use your pliers primarily, this is still actually going to hold up better. And yeah, I've used iterations like this in the Leatherman Blast, the Leatherman Fuse, and the Leatherman Kick, and they've all held up incredibly well. So this is pretty much where I'm going to close it off. Right now, this is the only tool in their lineup that I have basically no qualms with. I mean, if I'm really going to be nitpicky, the thing that annoys me the most is that it comes with a nylon sheath instead of the leather one that we get with the rebar. I just feel like it fits so much nicer and it looks so much nicer. But that's pretty much it. If they wanted to really impress me, they could include the pocket clip without increasing the price. But you know, that's a bit of a pipe dream after all. I mean, they got to find a way to eke out some money here and there as best they can. So hopefully this sort of answers the question of what tool I recommend to anyone to buy. And it's kind of in this order, with the exception of the arc, which I don't really recommend to basically anyone unless you know it's something that you want, and you know it's for you if it is. Bond first, then the Curl, then probably the Wave, and those are the tools that I would recommend in that order. I just don't see anything wrong with the Bond, and if I was going to give a gift and I wanted someone to have a positive experience, this tool specifically is the tool that I would gift. I think that this, even though it's not as fancy, it doesn't have the one-handed accessible blade, it's also capable of traveling places that these tools will never go. And with that, I want to thank you for your time, and we'll talk again soon.